Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharon. And good morning from my side as well. And it's my first Teams Nation conference, and it's amazing to see that we actually have not just one, but two Power Platform tracks here. So definitely a great sign of how these platforms are merging together. And that's really going to be a big part of my presentation today. So I will be talking about how Dataverse meets Teams. So kind of how biz apps and collaboration come together, and what kind of low-code application opportunities it creates for all users of Teams. So the objectives for today's session are going to be, first of all, to position the Microsoft Dataverse into the Microsoft Teams application platform story. Then I will be showing you some real-life examples of applications that our team has been building on top of Dataverse for Teams. And then we're going to have a discussion about the pros and cons. So how can you be sure that Dataverse for Teams is a good fit for your needs, for your application development purposes? And actually, sorry, I need to disable the timers from there. Well, maybe I can, yeah. So first, a quick introduction from myself. So I've been working with Microsoft Business Applications for quite a while. And for the, let's say, first 10 years of my blogging career, I've been focusing on the Dynamics side of the house. But then during the past 3 or 4 years, I've been shifting towards the Power Platform local story, because that's really where I see then the next big leap happening in the cloud apps and cloud platform capabilities from Microsoft. And I'm working as a Power Platform advisor and co-founder at a company called Forward Forever. We're based in Finland and Portugal, 14 people right now. And I'm really a citizen developer by heart, because I've never learned to code. And I've been building and delivering fairly complex business apps for big customers. But yeah, it's kind of I'm sort of a testament of the fact that no code and low code is real. And I've always also been a big fan of working out loud. So even before there was Teams, I was a big Yammer advocate in many companies. And today I'm really excited about the direction of how Teams is now evolving to not just a collaboration platform, but also, in a way, the next operating system for Microsoft. And so that's what we're going to be talking about then today in this session. So the agenda has 3 parts. So I'm first going to talk a bit about the big picture. So where did Dataverse actually come from, and why is it today the center of Microsoft's low-code universe? Then we'll look at the examples in practice. So I'll show 3 different kinds of applications that are running on Dataverse for Teams. And then, as mentioned, finally, some architecture discussion around what are the limitations you need to be aware of when building solution on top of Dataverse for Teams. But let's get started with the big picture. So what is Dataverse, and why should you care about it as much as I care about it? So first of all, it's not just a relational database. Even though it sounds a bit like that in the name, then it really is. It's a platform element in Power Platform. So it gives you features that you would otherwise need to build for your application, like security, workflows, integration, auditing, and application lifecycles. So you get a lot from it by leveraging Dataverse, not just the database underneath it. Then also you need to keep in mind that it's a very mature platform, actually. So the name is very new, but the actual stack of it has been available in Microsoft Cloud for over 10 years already. And it was just called Dynamics CRM or XRM in the platform perspective, but it really is an evolution of that investment from Microsoft. And it caters both for citizen developers and then the traditional code-first developers. So there is a full graphical user interface where you don't need to actually type in any code there. But if you want to go beyond the graphical user interface, then there's plenty of places for you to put your code in. Lots of APIs available and places to integrate and inject your own business logic there into the data model and the processes that run on top of Dataverse. And finally, it is really strategically the Microsoft's preferred choice for where you should be building Power Apps. Now, even though today SharePoint still is the most widely used data source, looking at all the stats for Power Apps, Canvas apps, but the bulk of the investment is in making sure that the native Power Apps experience with Dataverse is as good as it gets. So it should always be the best experience for building your apps. Now let's go look at the kind of an actual picture. So the types of applications you can build on top of Dataverse are three types. And today we are focusing on the teams that I mentioned there, surprisingly. And well, of course, you can build many different kinds of Teams applications, not just on Dataverse, but for the sake of today's topic, I'm going to talk about them as Teams apps, because if they are built on top of Dataverse for Teams, then that is really a specific type of an app on Dataverse. But then on the right, we have the bigger Dataverse box, which illustrates the fact that there are even more capabilities available for larger applications you could be building. So if they are custom apps, they are called Power Apps, or then you could be leveraging and extending the Dynamics 365 applications from Microsoft, sales, customer service, marketing, and so on, these traditional and new generation CRM applications. If we look at the bottom line there, the licensing part, then a big benefit of Dataverse for Teams, of course, is that it's included in the Microsoft 365 and Office 365 subscriptions, basically all the variants. Whereas if you go to using Dataverse for Power Apps or Dynamics, then there is a premium license you need to acquire in addition to your Teams and Office licenses. They are not that expensive if you're in the Power Apps section there, but if you then go to the full scale enterprise CRM scenarios, then the price tags start to be a bit higher there, understandably, because you get a lot of features there built into those products. But the Dataverse foundations are really the same for all those. Now, the key benefits for Dataverse Teams. So, of course, first of all, the fact that it's available to everyone. You don't need to pay more, and it's on by default. So that's a big thumbs up for Dataverse for Teams. And it really is from a technical perspective, a better foundation for building your app data model than Microsoft Lists or SharePoint Lists, as they used to be called, because it's a relational data model. So you can do stuff on lists, but Dataverse supports many more features that are typically needed even for smaller apps. And a great thing about it is that there's such a tight coupling between the team membership and then the Dataverse environment access management, so that it's equal to the owner member guest model of Teams, and it's kind of self-service. So you don't need an IT admin there to add members into the environment. You just invite them to a team. That is a major convenience there for environment admin perspective. And it is also a simplified version of the full Dataverse feature set. So it's been built with the citizen in mind, whereas then the full Dataverse comes from the enterprise side of things, and it caters also then to pro devs and has lots of bells and whistles that are maybe confusing for new app makers. But then you can also do some pro dev stuff there in Dataverse for Teams, so you can integrate it with external systems if you are using Azure API management. But then you are probably reaching towards a more pro dev story than a normal power user in Teams would be reaching out to. But it can be done. And finally, why the story is so great from an architecture perspective is that you can always upgrade the Dataverse for Teams environment into full Dataverse, and your app will just continue to work, and we will get more features that you can leverage from the full Dataverse. So it's a safe bet in that sense to start building your application there. And how to then try Dataverse if you are not familiar with it, then the quickest way really today is to spin up a sample application within Dataverse for Teams. So when you open the Power Apps app within Teams from the left rail there, then on the first page you will see add these apps to your team. So there's a great selection of template applications from Microsoft that will show you what kind of apps you could be building into the Teams environment yourself, or you could adapt these existing samples as well if needed. Now those are fairly advanced applications, and It takes a bit of effort to get to similar level as the sample apps, but you definitely should try them out. Inspections, issue reporting, employee ideas, those are great generic examples of what people really are building on top of Dataverse for Teams for their custom purposes as well. And really a major thing is that everybody can be an app maker thanks to Teams. Because if you are a team member, then you can provision a new Dataverse for Teams environment by just creating a new app there, installing Power Apps into your Teams, and then going to either deploy a sample app or then create a custom app there. Admins could block it, but you need to consciously do the kind of exclusion of these apps from the Teams admin center. So, and I don't recommend that admins would do that because this is so powerful and it can be covered as well. There's a good story behind that. And in terms of capacity, so all the environments get 2 gigabytes worth of storage capacity, and it's not connected to any of the full Dataverse capacity that might be used for your Dynamics applications or other bigger enterprise apps there. So it's all for that team alone, and it doesn't interfere with anyone else's capacity. And the number of environments you can have there depends on how many licensed Microsoft 365 users you have there. So if you have, for example, 1,000 users in your tenant, then you can get 55 Teams environments. If you have 100,000 users, then you get over 5,000 environments, which is a huge amount of Dataverse environments, at least compared to what the kind of old school Dynamics days was when you had one CRM and dev and test, and that was it. You could have thousands of environments for Teams. And while there's only one environment per team, then you can have as many apps there as you want to have. So yeah, it's not, you don't need an environment for each application. So lots of space there for all makers to experiment with Dataverse for Teams. So I'm gonna pause here for a moment and see if there's any questions in the chat about the kind of the big picture framing of Dataverse before we go to the practical examples.
No questions for you at this point. I guess
all right, excellent. So that means we have more time than available for going through the demos.
Awesome.
Right. So let's continue to look at then what does this mean in practice? What apps we've been building for customers? So scenarios I'm going to walk through are these three. So I'll start with a fairly basic task management application for a specific process. Then I'll move on to a scenario we have both a desktop and a mobile application built, as well as some data visualization. And third example is going to be more a custom UI with responsiveness, integration, and also then this broad distribution concept for sharing apps to outside a single team. But first, the simple scenario, so onboarding application. And the scenario here, the need that this app was created for is to really to ensure that the experience for handling all the necessary tasks for when a new employee joins a team, that they would have a good experience for both that employee as well as the existing team members to keep track of the tasks that need to be taken care of. A fairly generic need in that sense. And the starting point has been that there's been just a OneNote-based template list of the onboarding tasks, which has been maintained there as new tasks appear. Then a copy has been created from that OneNote for each new employee, and that has been the checklist. So kind of just a digital paper, but not really no more fancy data structures there or automation capabilities. And what we've done then with Dataverse for Teams with this onboarding app is that first we created a few tables for storing the onboarding test data in a relational database. Then we have business logic to copy these template tasks into specific employee-specific tasks when new onboarding processes start. And then, of course, have a nicer user interface for showing the progression of those tasks for a person and allowing filtering and better discovery of the status of what has been done and what has been maybe forgotten. So the first side of this, first step, creating the database tables. So here we can see the experience of how you would start building a data model in Dataverse for Teams. So we have added a few tables here for onboarding tasks, roles, task categories, and such. And you can see that this is basically what you do in Dataverse for Teams table editor. You choose a few different data types for the columns there, give names, and it's fairly similar to a Microsoft List experience. It's been simplified to be a very approachable UI for new app makers. So that's why it's also data editing is fairly similar to what List would be. Now, for actually maintaining the applications, the onboarding task templates there, we are using just a standard generated UI on top of one table. So this is something that actually Dataverse for Teams gives you by default. These kind of fields and lists of tasks and the CRUD operations for editing, updating, deleting the records. And it's not pretty, but it's fast and it's good enough for the admin purposes for keeping the tasks list up to date and adding categories. But then looking at when we have new employees to be onboarded, then we should have a nicer user interface for it. So we've then built a Power Apps gallery and built this kind of a custom card user interface for showing the list of employees, because this is what you really would want to have visible for the non-admins. And Power Apps is a great toolkit for making pretty UIs. Then when we drop it into a Teams channel as a tab, then the end result is that it looks a bit like Planner, but it has custom filters and our own business logic included there, so we can actually adjust this very specifically for this process's purposes. So we are in full control of what categories and what fields are shown in there. So fairly simple task management that could be done in Planner, but an alternative version for it. Now the next scenario is going to be about a bit more complex process. So this is about a hospital that wants to manage the availability of their hospital staff and kind of track the different types of visits and what actions are needed to treat the patients. So they create demand estimates through massive calculation Excels, and then want to track the actual numbers of what's going on at some periodic intervals, sampling a few days here and there. Does the estimate meet the reality? So the starting point here, as often, has been that there's been this one massive Excel workbook that had plenty of calculations, tabs, and so it had both the planning, the estimates, and then the actuals. And this, of course, is not really very friendly for the data entry for those doctors and nurses who need to then enter data into such a list. So they need to open up a PC and do the data entry at the end of their shift then. So not a very good user experience, of course, but something that's very common when needed to capture data. And what we did here then was that we, of course, modeled the same structures from the Excel workbook, so the tables and the calculation logic there into Dataverse for Teams, and then we created targeted user interfaces for all these different personas, for planning, for data entry, and also for analysis purposes. So looking at first the planning side of things, so this user interface it's not that pretty, but it's a structured way for the managers to kind of enter the planning variables into which are needed in those formulas. So it's still a much more controlled experience than what an open Excel workbook would be like. You can actually have logic there for data gathering, and it's more user friendly for them. But then think about all the tens and hundreds of people who need to enter data there for the actuals, then we should have something better for them, of course, better than a complex UI like this. So we went with designing then a mobile user interface that's very simple. So there are these categories that have been assigned for each persona, and then there are buttons where you can add more minutes to a category there. So add, for example, 10 minutes for this type of a task that has been assigned to you. And then at the end of the day, you already have the data there collected. You can keep the mobile app open there during the day and click on a few buttons, and then data is stored. No need to understand the big screen Excel experience, only for data entry. That's all you see there in the mobile app. And finally, then combining these two into a Power BI report that has been embedded there into that same team channel, of course, where we can then compare the planned versus actual hours. So yeah, you could do this in Excel, but again, it's so much better when you can drill into a Power BI report that has been designed for data analysis and drill downs and all that. So same data, but in a much more target experiences for these different personas was what we did with Dataverse for Teams. And then final example application before, again, pausing for questions, an IT self-service application scenario. Here the need has been, again, fairly generic. So there's, we need, as an IT department, we need to grant some rights for example, local admin rights for PC, or installing additional software, or granting access to SaaS applications outside Microsoft Cloud, for example. And in this scenario, the starting point was that there wasn't really any tools for this at all. There wasn't even any intranet page, no Microsoft Forms. It was all via emails or chat messages, and as a result, there was no visibility into what's requested, what's approved, what's delivered. So it was impossible to manage really that process. What we enabled with the Dataverse for Teams then for this scenario was that we first we of course modeled the requests and services into Dataverse tables and created a app, all this into an IT team that's only accessible for the IT admin personnel. Then we created an employee-facing IT request application, a simplified app that can then be used for browsing the catalog of services and requesting for these services. And then we also integrated with the native approvals feature in Microsoft Teams with approvals application, and orchestrated all this with Power Automate Cloud Flows behind the scenes. So creating the approval requests and then also starting the delivery of these services based on what they actually require to get installed for the actual employees. So again, starting from the end user perspective, so I'm an employee who needs to, for example, ask for local admin rights to my PC to perform some testing. So what can I do? I open up the IT request application from Teams and browse through a catalog of services that are available there, and I can read more details about it, open up a page full of information about what the terms of the service are, what's it for, and then click on the request service button there when I want to select, okay, this is something I need, and let's see what information is needed for actually delivering it. Then I'm taken to this request form there in the same application, and I need to enter a justification. Why should I get local admin rights? And then I also need to accept the terms for this service. So click a link there and tick a box. And once I'm done there, the send request button becomes active, and I can and push this out to the approval team to actually either accept or deny my request. And then what happens with the approval team members? So each service can have a different group of people who can approve it. It might be managers of the person or then some other users. So we use the standard approvals application feature for managing that, which means that the approval team members don't have to know about the application at all. They just get standard approvals into their Teams notification feed there, and they see the details about what service it is, justification, and then commenting and rejecting or approving the request there. So very standard, very in line with all the other processes that could be using the same approvals foundation there in the organization in the future. And once we click approve, then there's a flow that will update the request there in our Dataverse for Teams environment, and then we start the delivery flow. So if we get an approval, then there's two ways that we can then actually ship the service. The easy way is the Azure AD groups. So if it's something that can also only be done directly just by adding a member to a group, then we do it with a flow. Or if it's something that needs some manual actions, then there's a different service partner who will get an email with the details into Outlook, their Outlook, or we send out by Outlook email, and then that's considered to be delivered. They are then going to be in charge of installing software, for example. And the IT admin visibility into this process is then via a separate IT request admin application. Here we can track the status of requests that are in the pipeline in some specific dates, see how many requests there are per service, or drill into users, what, for example, what service is Jukka asking for, who is approving or denying those requests. So we have the visibility to a full catalog of data there via this IT admin application. So that gives us the big picture to manipulate the whole data then. Whereas then a normal user only sees their own request, of course. I don't need to see my colleagues' request at all, but IT team can then use a similar interface in Dataverse for Teams for browsing through that kind of information there. And looking at then the kind of big picture architecture here. So this is an important capability of Dataverse for Teams that I want to highlight here. So we built this application in this in the admin team that will then host all the Dataverse tables, all the data, and also where the application UIs and flows are developed. It's all done within this admin team. But then we can publish the application, the end user facing IT requests to a separate Azure AD group. And then we can pin that into basically any team's channel tab. So they don't need to be members of that team where the application is running. We can broadly distribute it in the organization and give them limited access for those users via this Cadence app user interface and run the whole thing, manage it within a secure environment that doesn't have all the users of the organization there within that Dataverse. And we orchestrate the processes then via Cloud Flows, which can then introduce different steps, for example, for future services that need more approval logic there, or that could be doing some other types of service delivery to complete those requests. So we have full control of them extending the model here for what the requests are, and yet we still rely on the approve deny features to be done by the standard user interface, so that the members who are then assigned to this team, again, they don't have to be members of the admin team. So they can be anyone within the organization, and they will get either the Teams notification from the approvals app or then an Outlook email, and they can click a button there. And once a single person does that, then it's completed for also the other users. So it's very simple. We don't have to reinvent the approvals wheel there because we can leverage these standard functionality by calling it with Power Automate Cloud Flows. And we can then maintain, for example, the group information about which Azure AD groups are grant you access to a specific service. It's all done via the IT admin app there, so we don't need to customize the application again if there are new services included into the catalog there. So this is a very good, a fairly complex Dataverse for Teams application, but illustrates the fact that you can build something that also serves the entire organization if you can sort of split the roles there and use store sensitive data here, but then service only parts of it for the broader organization. I'll pause for a moment here again and see if there's any questions in the chat about these examples that I've shown here.
There was just one question which a member of the audience has actually answered for you, but I'll ask anyway. Is the Power BI report also in the Dataverse for Teams license included, or are there additional license needed?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think that in this scenario, it's running in Power BI Pro, but I'm actually not, I don't think it's yet covered there. So there's a visualization story that can be Microsoft pushing for, but yeah, I think that is still something that it is full Dataverse connectivity. So I think you need a Pro license, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's a good question. I'll need to check it out and come back to that on whether there's any built-in license options there yet for those services. Good question. Any other
New question just popped in. Did you use solutions to manage the development of the last app?
Yes, in fact, I did use solutions here because we do then have also a separate development team for this application. Because as you see, it's a fairly complex process, and we are then not going to want to do modification in production. So once we have service requests running for thousands of users in this organization, so we need to have a controlled way to introduce new features. So we do then export the solution from a different dev team and push it out into this IT admin team then for consumption. So yes, solutions are supported in Dataverse for Teams, but there are limitations that actually I've covered in my recent blog post, or I can post a link there at the end of the session to cover that in details. A very good question there, yes. Anything else there in the chat before?
Fernando jumped in and said that everybody needs a Power BI Pro license.
Yeah, I think there's still no kind of free lunch there for Dataverse for Teams even. Yeah.
And so that's led to the question from Andreas about, are there any other ways to visualize data inside Dataverse for Teams without using Power BI?
Well, in the Power Scan apps, you can do some very crude visualization, but it's you wouldn't want to really try to do what Power BI does. So usually it would be then wise to look at the options for broadly licensing Power BI then in the organization, really. Yeah, a good question there.
And again, another question from Fernando. Did the 2 gig capacity limit on your Dataverse in Teams affect the app in the long run?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the amount of data that we really store into this kind of application is fairly limited. So we have a few tables, a few rows, and we don't store any images or other attachments here. So the consumption of data is going to be fairly low. So I think the example of this kind of process, then you could probably be running this for many years in this organization with a few thousand users, and you wouldn't need to clean up data from there. But of course, you could then do some deletion of all requests that are no longer needed there. But yeah, a good important aspect also to keep in mind in the architecture perspective.
Yeah, I guess because you used the approvals app, you kind of took that. That's quite a chunky piece of data. You took that outside of the solution, right?
Yeah, although it is in that environment, so I'm not actually entirely sure whether it's counted towards the capacity there. I think it actually does consume the same gigabytes there, but still, I'd say that this kind of application is fairly safe to be used within that 2 gigabyte limit. Very good questions. So actually, maybe I could move on to the next section where I'm going to go more into details about what is supported and not supported in Dataverse for Teams, because we are now entering that dialogue here. So really, you need to keep in mind that this free version that's bundled with Teams can't do everything. And so if you are building a very try-to-replace Excels like we see there, or simple list for onboarding, then these are fairly encapsulated and independent processes, and they are a good fit for Dataverse for Teams. Usually no threads there at all, and try to turn that into an app in Dataverse for Teams. But then we're going to a more broader organization-wide application, like the IT request application, for example. Then you really need to understand, okay, what are these limitations, which we already started talking about there in the chat, because they might be a blocker for what you want to then build with Dataverse for Teams. So understanding limitation is really critical there before you start building application. And the limits are intentional. So it's not the fact that Microsoft couldn't allow you to do more, but it's a free taster version of what the full Dataverse offers. So it's intentional that there are limitations there. I'm not sure if it's going to be, of course, they might be expanded in the future, but still it will be smaller than the full Dataverse. And even though you can always upgrade to a full Dataverse, then you really kind of need to know it upfront that it's going to be a good business case for the organization, knowing these limitations, because we don't want to end up doing a POC and then saying, okay, actually we cannot deploy this for the whole organization because of the cost would be prohibitive for the organization. So looking at the team feature sheet of Dataverse for Teams, so we have here different categories of like what's included in Dataverse for Teams, and I'll give you the slides link later, so You don't have to, or you can screenshot if you want to, of course, as well. So we have lots of capabilities here for, of course, looking at, so we get to the Teams client interfaces, lots of practical data types there, relational data. You can use images there as well. It integrates with lots of Office services, as we've seen there. You have a good way to integrate the security story with what the team members represent. There is a way to kind of, well, as mentioned, we can have a separate team and then for development purposes and then ship a solution from there into the production team. So it is supported, but it's not, of course, very pro dev ready because there's no API access at all there. It's all manual. For business rules and workflows, so we can then do the Power Automate integration as seen there, and reporting. Well, we can do Power BI, but as mentioned, it's not included in the licensing today, at least yet. And now if we then go to the full Dataverse feature set, so we see that it's a lot longer list of things you can do there. So we get a variety of different client types we can use, more extensive data types, offline, virtual entities, better search, API integration points, Azure Event Hubs, service buses. Security model is very, very extensive in Dataverse thanks to the Dynamics background. We get auditing, logging, we get really pro dev compatible lifecycle management story for environments, so we can integrate with Azure DevOps. We can use the kind of proper managed solution strategy for our app deployment processes. We can use all the built-in business rules and workflows of Dataverse, and reporting-wise, we also have more features there. So yes, there's plenty that you get with the full Dataverse if you pay more. And sometimes it's very good idea to pay for this rather than to try and work around these limitations, because while you could maybe export data from Dataverse for Teams to some other location, then you are still spending money by having someone do it and building custom services for that kind of stuff there, which you could get with the full Dataverse for free, or bundled in there, not for free, in exchange for the license that you pay for the premium Power Apps and Power Automate. And a big thing to ask there is that if you are using Dataverse for Teams, then can your app actually live only within Teams? Because if you are automating a process that only is already today managed in Teams via these chats and informal collaboration, then yeah, it makes perfect sense to have the app there in the channel. But it's not always the case. So if, for example, we need to reach out to field workers who are doing the bulk of their work outside somewhere else, not living within Teams, then this can be a big barrier for adoption, having that only accessible via Teams. And especially in mobile use cases, it's pretty cumbersome to find the application on your mobile phone. You cannot pin it there into your start screen like you can with native applications or full Power Apps. So this is it can be something that you don't really then get much traction from the users. And while you can open the Dataverse for Teams apps in a new browser tab, then if you do that, then you need a premium license. So it's kind of supported, but you need to then ensure that all the users also have the license to do that if you instruct them to open it outside of Teams in a full browser tab. And thinking about then finally the positioning for Dataverse for Teams, so it really is all about the kind of experimentation, what you are looking to achieve first. And it's a great way to build something in previous, show some tangible applications for end users, for business process owners, decision makers, to see that, okay, this is something that we could have. Doing a proof of concept is a great fit for Dataverse for Teams, because you don't need to pay for any extra licenses, which is often an admin barrier at least. But then if you know already that you cannot go the full way with just the Dataverse for Teams with the limitations, then maybe you should think about do we build it there and then kind of have a migration into the full Dataverse, or could you actually use the new pay-as-you-go model there right from the start? So that is something that's very interesting from this kind of especially POC perspective, because there's then no upfront commitment on having a number of seats licensed for your users in the organization, because you can just pay for those users who are opening the app every month. That's the only thing that you need to then license there, and you don't also need to manage it yourself. You assign the capacity, or you attach it to an Azure subscription, and then that will accumulate the cost for the actual usage of the application. Same for the capacity and the dev test prod environment, so you only pay for the capacity that you consume there. Plus, you can also integrate this with the Azure Cost Management, so it can be very familiar to organizations who are already leveraging Azure in their custom app development side of their app story. Right, we've used our time, so a few closing thoughts, and then I'll pause for comments and questions. So Dataverse for Teams is something you really should be embracing. It's a great opportunity for building applications, and it has a very critical role in the Teams operating system story. And you should always remember that Dataverse is very fundamental to Power Platform, much more than a database. But then you should expect to find some quirks and limitations in the maker experience and solution management. All those, if you come from a Dynamics background, then it's not quite the same as what you have there in the full Dataverse. So bear that in mind. It can take more time for you to build your solutions there than in the kind of full enterprise scale Dataverse environments. And although there's lots of limitations there, then there's so many scenarios where this can be the first real low-code applications that organizations can adopt thanks to the licensing benefits there. So always evaluate whether you could actually live within these boundaries with the application. If you can, then this is a great fit for doing the first experiments in the organization. But then finally, don't sell only this as your option. So always start the discussion there about what you could then, where you would benefit from having the premium licenses. So don't shut out the world outside of Teams in that sense. So ensure that you have a way then to continue building your capabilities via the full Dataverse platform. All right. We have covered my slides, so now is a good time to pause to see that if there are questions or comments there, and I'll be happy to stick around for as long as we have this room open here. But thank you very much for coming to the session. It was great to talk to the Teams Nation audience about all the goodness of Dataverse. And awesome. I will be posting the slides into my Twitter and blog and LinkedIn, so be sure to follow me if you want to refer back to the materials there. Did we get any questions there in the
Yeah, I think the discussion carried on quite a bit. So if we go back to kind of where we were, just make sure you covered everything off. Although I have to just say, yes, definitely better than lunch. Well done. Is there a compute limit in Dataverse for Teams beside the 2 gig limit?
Compute, so yeah, the API capacities. Well, that is the API calls are a problematic area because there are licensing limitations for it in the full Dataverse as well, but there's no way to report it or enforce it today at all. So it's a kind of a bit of a gray area still, even in the full Dataverse. So I would say that if you are planning to push some very heavy automation there and do lots of API calls, then down the line, eventually there may be issues with it. So, but again, I'm sure that kind of Dataverse for Teams is strategic for Microsoft, so they are not intentionally trying to limit it down, at least to cover these team scenarios where it is really meant for. Then it should cover all those API requests with the kind of built-in licensing. Because the thing is that you cannot then pay for extra capacity in Dataverse for Teams. You can only pay by upgrading to full Dataverse. So there is no add-on licenses for Dataverse for Teams at all. It is a bundled feature, and then the next step is the full Dataverse.
Fernando, just on that point, did comment that for him, Dataverse for Teams is a bait to buy the whole package, which I was naturally shocked at.
It is kind of a gateway drug for getting into the full platform.
Nice way of putting it.
I think it's
Okay.
a good bait. I mean, it's a very good deal to get for free. I mean, think about a couple of years back, this was unheard of that you could have free Dataverse, and now we have it. So
That's
yeah,
true.
but it is true. It's designed to be a step in the ladder towards the more premium features.
Okay, now Will, just on that point, we also had a comment that when we were talking about Power BI Pro and whether it was included or not, somebody did put in the comments there that Power BI Pro is included in the E5 license.
Yes.
There is always that.
Yeah, it is, of course, yeah.
Okay, Andreas asked the question, what is the relation between Dataverse for Teams and Canvas apps?
Well, the Canvas apps are the only app type that is supported today in Dataverse for Teams. So the model-driven apps that are the ones that look like Dynamics applications, so they are not today supported in Dataverse for Teams. And there isn't really any public roadmap about whether they will be there or not. So Canvas apps are the things that you build in Dataverse for Teams. The editor experience is a bit different than the FullMaker portal for Power Apps today because of the Fluent UI components that are only available in Teams Editor, but those are converging. So in, I don't know, in a few months' time, there should be one and the same editor experience for Canvas apps, be it in Dataverse for Teams or then the sort of separate full Power Apps Maker portal.
Okay. And then we had a comment, I guess it could be a good idea to formulate a questionnaire that would help makers and admins understand if the planned app/solution would be affected by the limitations of Dataverse for Teams.
Yes, a very good idea to do that kind of analysis beforehand, before jumping into saying that, okay, this is how we're going to do it. Yeah.
Yep. And then that was also followed up with, do you think it could be a workable model to provision a dedicated pay-as-you-go environment and have a sign-up application or forms form with the automated approval process to let people request to get Power Apps Premium licensing or through a self-service manner?
That is an excellent idea. I mean, it could be an app that you would build for Dataverse for Teams and then enter data there, and then you could get the keys to the full pay-as-you-go environment. So definitely, yeah, I mean, this kind of automation with the Power Platform Center of Excellence StarterKit, there are already plenty of templates there which are great for this kind of environment provisioning and requesting for resources scenarios. So yes, something similar could definitely be built there if you are then serious about giving the app makers a step up to get to the premium environments. Great idea.
Cool. And then Fernando did yeah, that's quite sad, Fernando, showed a solution in Dataverse for Teams to a client to replace their Microsoft Excel spreadsheet old way, but they didn't want to pay for the consultancy. They preferred to stay with Microsoft Excel.
Well, then they get what they pay for.
You know, Excel's really great. It does do an awful lot, but it's not the most user-friendly tool in the box, is it? You know?
There's always going to be Excel, so we cannot replace them all with Power Apps or Dataverse, but if at least 10% are converted into apps, then that's going to be a huge transformation for most organizations.
Okay, and then lots of thank yous and final comment from Fernando. I think managers are just so afraid of asking people to spend new budget resources where they would receive a great return on investment with Dataverse. Yeah, it is always sweating the Excel asset, right?
Yeah, so you need to show some examples, and for that, Dataverse for Teams is a great tool. So build a few smaller applications there, show them that this is how we can build it, and then talk about the cost of resources you need for it. And for example, that your business users can do the admin and maintenance extension of it rather than buying consultants there. So the ROI can be there, but if you only show the licensing prices, then what do you compare it to? So it's usually takes a while, but these are great tools for kind of kicking off the discussion and showing the potential of the platform.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, the power of the whole Office 365 platform is that integration, isn't it? So while Excel is a great tool for what it does, you know, the ability to use the graph to get to users, to use approvals and approval flows, you know, you can't integrate all of that in a seamless way like you can with these apps for Teams.
Exactly. There's nothing quite like it out there. I mean, with no other vendor. So in that sense, the future is bright for Teams and Power Platform, and Microsoft's cloud offering in general.
What a positive note to end on. Love it. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Excellent session, well enjoyed by the audience. Thank you for the clapping, very good.